Have you ever had that moment when someone's cruel words cut so deep that they change the entire trajectory of your life? When a single sentence, spoken with venom and witnessed by everyone you love, became the catalyst for something extraordinary. My story begins at a family barbecue in Washington, D.C., where the scent of grilled meat mixed with the bitter taste of humiliation. It was there, surrounded by the cherry blossoms of spring and the judgmental eyes of my relatives, that my aunt delivered what she thought would be my final blow. But sometimes, life has a way of turning our deepest wounds into our greatest triumphs. This is the story of how one letter changed everything. But before we begin, leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and tell us where you're listening from. The April air in Washington, D.C. carried the sweet fragrance of cherry blossoms as I pulled my beat-up Honda Civic into the driveway of my Uncle Roberto's house in Tacoma Park. The modest two-story home, with its peeling white paint and overgrown lawn, had been the epicenter of our family gatherings for as long as I could remember. Today was no different, the annual spring barbecue that brought together 3 generations of the Martinez family. I sat in my car for a moment, staring at the envelope in my passenger seat. The official seal of the President of the United States seemed to mock me from its pristine white surface. I had carried this letter with me for 3 days now, unable to fully process its contents. Part of me wondered if I was dreaming, if the words printed on that government letterhead were real. "Carmen! Mija! You're here!" My mother's voice cut through my reverie as she appeared at the front door, her arms already extended for one of her signature crushing hugs. Maria Elena Martinez, at 62, was still the force of nature she'd always been, her silver hair pulled back in a tight bun, her floral dress bright against the gray D.C. sky. I tucked the letter into my purse and stepped out of the car. The familiar sounds of my family washed over me, children laughing in the backyard, the sizzle of meat on the grill, the rapid-fire Spanish that always dominated our gatherings. Uncle Roberto waved from behind his massive barbecue setup, a beer in one hand and tongs in the other. "Carmen, come here. Tell your uncle how that fancy nonprofit job is treating you," he called out, his voice carrying the gentle teasing that had defined our relationship since I was a child. I forced a smile and made my way through the familiar crowd. My cousins Miguel and Sophia were there with their families, their children running around the yard with grass stains on their clothes and joy in their eyes. My grandmother, Abuela Rosa, sat in her lawn chair like a queen holding court, her weathered hands folded in her lap as she watched her family with satisfied eyes. And then there was Tia Esperanza. My aunt stood near the back porch, her perfectly manicured nails wrapped around a glass of wine, her designer clothes a stark contrast to the casual atmosphere of the barbecue. At 55, Esperanza had married well. Her husband was a successful contractor who had built a small empire in the D.C. metro area. She never let anyone forget it. "Carmen!" she called out, her voice carrying that particular tone I'd learned to dread. "Come here, Mija. I was just telling everyone about how you're still working at that little charity downtown." I approached cautiously, my purse clutched tightly against my side. The letter seemed to burn against my hip, but I kept my expression neutral. "It's not a little charity, Tia. The Urban Youth Development Center has been serving the community for over 20 years. I tried to keep my voice steady, professional, the same tone I used when presenting to board members or speaking at community meetings. Esperanza laughed, a sound like breaking glass. "Oh, Carmen, always so serious. But tell me, how much are they paying you at this center of yours? Surely by now, at 35, you should be making real money." The backyard conversation began to quiet around us. I could feel the eyes of my family members turning our way, drawn by the familiar tension that always seemed to emerge between my aunt and me. My cousin Miguel cleared his throat uncomfortably, while Sophia busied herself with cutting vegetables at the outdoor table. "I'm doing work that matters, Tia. Money isn't everything. Money isn't everything." Esperanza's voice rose an octave, and she gestured dramatically with her wine glass. "Carmen, you're 35 years old. You live in a studio apartment in Columbia Heights. You drive a car that's older than some of my grandchildren, and you work for what, $30,000 a year? Maybe 40. The number hung in the air like a physical blow. It wasn't far from the truth, and everyone knew it. My cheeks burned with embarrassment, but I tried to maintain my composure. "I'm helping kids who don't have opportunities. I'm running programs that keep them off the streets, that help them get into college. College! Esperanza interrupted, her laugh becoming more mocking. You're helping other people's children go to college while you can't even afford to pay off your own student loans. Carmen, when are you going to wake up and realize that playing savior to street kids isn't going to pay your bills? The conversation around us had stopped completely now. Uncle Roberto had turned away from his grill, my mother had stepped closer with worry etched on her face, and even the children had sensed the tension and grown quiet. Esperanza, my mother said quietly, maybe we should? No, Maria Elena. Someone needs to tell her the truth. My aunt's voice carried across the yard like a pronouncement. Carmen, you're a smart woman. You graduated from Georgetown, for God's sake. You could be making 6 figures, living in a nice house, maybe even married with children of your own. Instead, you're wasting your life on a job that doesn't appreciate you and will never give you security. I felt the familiar sting of tears behind my eyes, but I blinked them back. This wasn't the first time Esperanza had attacked my choices, but it had never been so public, so calculated. I'm making a difference, I said quietly. The kids I work with. The kids you work with will forget you the minute they graduate. They'll move on with their lives while you're still there, still broke, still alone. Esperanza's voice was building to a crescendo now, and I could see she was enjoying having an audience. Carmen, you need to face reality. You're not Mother Teresa. You're not going to change the world. And at the rate you're going to end up like old Mrs. Rodriguez down the street, alone, broke and forgotten. The words hit me like physical blows. Mrs. Rodriguez had been a family friend who died the previous winter. She'd lived alone in a tiny apartment, survived on Social Security, and had been found days after her death by a neighbor who noticed her mail piling up. You know what your problem is, Carmen, Esperanza continued, sensing she had wounded me. You think you're better than money, better than success. But let me tell you something. Nobility doesn't pay rent. Good intentions don't put food on the table. And helping poor kids isn't going to change the fact that you're going to die, just as poor as they are. The backyard fell silent except for the distant sound of traffic on Georgia Avenue. I could feel everyone's eyes on me, waiting for my response. My mother looked stricken, my uncle uncomfortable, my cousins embarrassed. Even Abuela Rosa had stopped her gentle rocking and was staring at us with concern. I opened my mouth to respond, to defend myself, to explain that my work had meaning beyond monetary value. But the words wouldn't come, because underneath my anger and hurt, I knew that Esperanza had touched on my deepest fears, the late-night worries about my financial future, the anxiety about growing old alone, the nagging doubt that maybe I was wasting my life on a job that would never provide security. I started, my voice barely above a whisper. You what? Esperanza pressed, sensing victory. You're going to tell me about all the lives you've touched? About how meaningful your work is? Carmen, meaning doesn't pay bills. Purpose doesn't buy groceries. And passion doesn't provide for your retirement. That's when she delivered the final blow. Face it, Mija, she said, her voice dripping with false sympathy. You're going to die broke. Just like all the other bleeding hearts who think they can save the world. You'll die broke, alone, and forgotten, and all those kids you're trying to help won't even remember your name. The silence that followed was deafening. I felt as if the ground had opened up beneath me, as if everyone at the barbecue could see straight through to my soul and the fears that live there. My aunt's words echoed in my head, you're going to die broke. But as I stood there, feeling smaller than I had in years, I felt the weight of the envelope in my purse. The letter I'd been carrying for 3 days. The letter that had changed everything. I took a deep breath and looked around at my family's faces. Some showed pity, others embarrassment, and a few seemed to be waiting for me to crumble completely. But I thought about the journey that had brought me to this moment, the years of work that had led to that letter, and I realized that this was my moment of truth. Actually, Tia, I said, my voice growing stronger with each word, there's something I need to tell you. 2 years earlier, the fluorescent lights in the Urban Youth Development Center flickered as I sat at my desk, surrounded by grant applications and progress reports. It was past 9 p.m., and the building was empty except for me and the security guard who occasionally walked the halls. Through my small office window, I could see the lights of downtown D.C. twinkling in the distance, a reminder of the world that existed beyond these walls. I'd been working at the center for 8 years, starting as a program coordinator fresh out of Georgetown's public policy program. My student loans had been crushing, my apartment was barely more than a closet, and my salary was exactly what you'd expect from a nonprofit serving one of D.C.'s most challenging neighborhoods. But every day, I woke up knowing that my work mattered. The center sat on the corner of 14th and U Street, in a neighborhood that had seen decades of struggle and slow, painful renewal. Our building was a converted warehouse, its brick walls covered with murals painted by the kids in our programs. Inside, we ran after-school tutoring, job training, college prep, and mentorship programs for teenagers from across the city. That particular evening, I was working on a report about one of our most successful initiatives, a program that connected high school students with internships at government agencies and nonprofit organizations. The program had been my brainchild, born from my own experience navigating the intimidating world of D.C. politics and policy as a first-generation college student. You know, Carmen, most people would have gone home hours ago. I looked up to find Marcus Williams, our executive director, standing in my doorway. At 62, Marcus was a legend in D.C.'s nonprofit community. He'd been running programs for at-risk youth since the 1980s, had survived budget cuts, political changes, and the constant struggle of trying to do more with less. Just finishing up the quarterly report for the internship program, I said, gesturing to the papers spread across my desk. The numbers are incredible, Marcus. 93% of our participants have enrolled in college, and 60% of those are majoring in public service fields. Marcus smiled and stepped into my office. That's what happens when you give kids hope and opportunity. But Carmen, you can't save everyone by working yourself to death. I leaned back in my chair, feeling the familiar ache in my shoulders from hours of hunching over my computer. I know, but there's so much to do. The Williams boy just got into Howard with a full scholarship. Maria Santos is interning at the Department of Education. And yesterday, I got a call from a girl who graduated from our program 5 years ago. She's now a social worker in Baltimore, running her own programs for teen parents. You see, Marcus said, settling into the chair across from my desk. This is what I'm talking about. You have this light in your eyes when you talk about the kids. It's what makes you special at this work. But Carmen, you need to take care of yourself too. I thought about my aunt's constant criticism, the family gatherings where I felt like I had to defend my choices, the dates that ended when men learned about my salary and my dedication to work that required long hours and emotional investment. Sometimes I wonder if I'm just being naive, I admitted. My family thinks I'm wasting my life. They see my apartment, my car, my bank account, and they think I'm failing. Marcus was quiet for a moment, then leaned forward. Carmen, can I tell you something? I've been in this work for 30 years. I've seen hundreds of young people come through programs like this, both as staff and as participants. Most of the staff members burn out after a few years. They get tired of the long hours, the low pay, the constant struggle for funding. But every once in a while, I meet someone who has something special. Someone who doesn't just do this work, but who lives it. What do you mean? I mean that you don't just run programs for these kids. You become invested in their success in a way that goes beyond professionalism. You attend their graduations, you write recommendation letters at midnight, you take personal calls from kids who need someone to believe in them. That's not just a job, Carmen. That's a calling. I felt tears prick my eyes. But what if my family is right? What if I'm just being foolish, thinking I can make a difference? Let me ask you something, Marcus said. Do you remember Jamal Thompson? I nodded immediately. Jamal had been one of our first participants when I started at the center. He'd come from a family struggling with addiction and poverty, had been in and out of the juvenile justice system, and had seemed destined for a life of trouble. But something about him had sparked my interest, and I'd spent extra time working with him, helping him see possibilities beyond his circumstances. Jamal graduated from our program, went to community college, then transferred to George Washington University. He's now a youth counselor in Southeast D.C., working with kids who remind him of himself. Last month, he called me to say that he's been accepted to graduate school. He wants to get his master's in social work. I remember, I said softly. Carmen, Jamal credits you with saving his life. He says you were the first adult who ever believed he could be more than his circumstances. Now he's doing the same thing for other kids. That's what I call the ripple effect, The impact of your work extends far beyond what you can see. I thought about all the kids I'd worked with over the years, the ones who'd succeeded and the ones who'd struggled, the late-night phone calls and the graduation ceremonies, the heartbreaks and the victories. But the money, I started. The money is a symptom, not the disease, Marcus interrupted. Yes, nonprofits are underfunded. Yes, people in this field sacrifice financially for their commitment to the work. But Carmen, what would you be worth if you were working on Wall Street, making six figures, but going home every night feeling empty? What would you be worth if you had a big house and a fancy car but no sense of purpose? I stayed late that night, but not to work. Instead, I sat in my office thinking about Marcus's words, about the faces of the kids I'd worked with, about the path that had led me to this work in the first place. 3 months later, I received a call that would change everything. Carmen Martinez. The voice on the other end was professional, crisp. Yes, speaking. Ms. Martinez, this is Jennifer Walsh from the White House Office of Public Engagement. I'm calling because your name has been brought to our attention regarding your work with the Urban Youth Development Center. I nearly dropped the phone. I'm sorry, could you repeat that? We've been made aware of your internship program and its impact on connecting underserved youth with government service opportunities. The President's office is interested in learning more about your work. Over the next several weeks, I found myself in a surreal series of meetings and interviews. It turned out that several of the young people who had gone through our program had made significant impacts in their various government internships. Their supervisors had taken note, and word had traveled up the chain of command. The program I created, which I'd thought of as a small initiative serving a few dozen kids each year, had actually placed over 300 young people in government internships over the past 5 years. These weren't just internships, they were transformative experiences that had led to careers in public service, policy work, and community organizing. Ms. Martinez, Jennifer Walsh explained during one of our meetings, you've created a pipeline of diverse, committed young people entering public service. These aren't kids who would have found these opportunities on their own. You've identified talent in communities that are often overlooked and connected them with pathways to leadership. I thought about all the late nights, all the grant applications, all the times I'd driven kids to interviews or helped them prepare for college applications. I'd never stepped back to see the bigger picture. The President, Jennifer continued, is committed to recognizing individuals who are making significant contributions to strengthening our democracy through community service. Your work exemplifies exactly the kind of grassroots leadership that creates lasting change. 2 months later, I received a letter requesting my presence at the White House for a private meeting with the President. The letter explained that I was being recognized as part of a small group of community leaders whose work had made significant impact on national priorities. I read the letter dozens of times, each time feeling more bewildered. How had my small program, my daily work with kids who reminded me of myself, come to the attention of the highest office in the land? The answer came during my meeting with the President himself. Carmen, he said, shaking my hand in the Oval Office, I want you to know that your work is exactly what America needs. You've proven that investing in young people, particularly those from underserved communities, creates a return that extends far beyond what we can measure. He told me about reports he'd received from various agencies about the quality of the interns who had come through our program. He spoke about the importance of creating pathways for young people who might not otherwise have access to leadership opportunities. He talked about the ripple effect of my work, how the kids I'd mentored were now mentoring others, how the program had become a model that other cities were trying to replicate. I want to present you with this, he said, handing me an official letter on White House stationery. This is a Presidential Recognition Award for Outstanding Community Service. Carmen, you've shown that one person, working with dedication and heart, can create change that touches thousands of lives. I looked down at the letter, seeing the presidential seal, the formal language describing my work, the signature that made it official. But what struck me most was a handwritten note at the bottom. Thank you for proving that public service comes in many forms. Your work embodies the best of America. As I sat in my car outside the White House, holding the letter, I thought about all the times I doubted myself, all the family gatherings where I'd felt like I had to defend my choices, all the moments when I'd wondered if I was wasting my life. I thought about my aunt's words. You're going to die broke. Maybe she was right about the money. Maybe I would never have the financial security that came with a corporate career. But as I looked at the letter in my hands, I realized that I was rich in ways that couldn't be measured in dollars. I was rich in the knowledge that my work mattered. I was rich in the relationships I'd built with young people who had trusted me with their dreams. I was rich in the satisfaction of knowing that somewhere in Washington, D.C., there were young people working in government offices who might never have had those opportunities if not for a program I'd created. I was rich in purpose. Back at the barbecue, I stood in my aunt's shadow, feeling the weight of 20 pairs of eyes on me. The cherry blossoms that had seemed so beautiful when I arrived now felt like witnesses to my humiliation. But as I reached into my purse and felt the crisp edge of the presidential letter, something shifted inside me. "Actually, Tia," I said, my voice growing stronger, "there's something I need to tell you." Esperanza raised an eyebrow, clearly expecting me to concede defeat. "Oh, what's that, Mija?" Finally ready to admit I'm right. I pulled the envelope from my purse, my hands steadier than they'd been all week. The presidential seal caught the afternoon sunlight, and I saw my mother's eyes widen as she recognized the official markings. 3 days ago," I said, my voice carrying across the suddenly quiet backyard, "I received something in the mail. Something that made me realize just how wrong you are about my life." I opened the envelope carefully, unfolding the letter that had been burning in my consciousness since I'd first read it. The White House letterhead seemed to glow in the D.C. afternoon light. "This," I said, holding up the letter, "is a personal letter from the President of the United States." The silence that followed was different from the uncomfortable quiet that had surrounded my aunt's attack. This was the silence of shock, of disbelief, of minds trying to process information that didn't fit their existing assumptions. "Carmen," my mother whispered, taking a step closer. "What are you saying?" I looked around at my family's faces, seeing the mixture of confusion and curiosity replacing the pity and embarrassment that had been there moments before. Even Esperanza's confident smirk was beginning to fade. "I'm saying," I continued, my voice gaining strength with each word, "that the President of the United States has personally recognized my work. That the program I created, the one that pays me so little, according to Tia Esperanza, has been identified as a model for the entire country." I began to read from the letter, my voice carrying across the backyard. "Dear Ms. Martinez, it has come to my attention that your innovative approach to connecting underserved youth with government service opportunities has created a pipeline of diverse, committed young people entering public service. Your Urban Youth Development Center internship program has placed over 300 young people in meaningful government internships over the past 5 years, with over 90% of participants going on to pursue higher education and careers in public service." I looked up to see my Uncle Roberto setting down his beer, my cousins Miguel and Sofia staring at me with open mouths, and my grandmother Rosa nodding slowly, as if she'd always known this day would come. "The letter continues," I said, my voice now carrying the confidence I'd felt in the Oval Office. "Your work exemplifies the kind of grassroots leadership that strengthens our democracy. You have proven that investing in young people, particularly those from underserved communities, creates a return that extends far beyond what we can measure. The ripple effect of your work, how the young people you've mentored are now mentoring others, how your program has become a model that other cities are trying to replicate, demonstrates the profound impact that one dedicated individual can have on our nation's future." The backyard was so quiet I could hear the distant sound of the metro train and the chirping of birds in the cherry trees. My aunt's wine glass hung suspended in her hand, her face pale. "But that's not all," I continued. "Last week, I had a private meeting with the President in the Oval Office. He told me personally that my work represents the best of America. He said that people like me, people who choose purpose over profit, who invest in others rather than just themselves, are what make our democracy strong." I folded the letter carefully, but kept it visible in my hands. "So, Tia Esperanza, when you say I'm going to die broke, I want you to know something. I am rich in ways you can't possibly understand. I am rich in the knowledge that my work matters. I am rich in the relationships I've built with young people who trusted me with their dreams. I am rich in the satisfaction of knowing that somewhere in Washington, D.C., there are young people working in government offices who might never have had those opportunities if not for the program I created." I took a step closer to my aunt, who seemed to have shrunk in the past few minutes. You see, Tia, you measure wealth in dollars and possessions. But I measure it in impact. And by that measure, I am one of the richest people in this city. The silence stretched on, broken only by the sound of my grandmother Rosa slowly clapping her hands. The applause was soft at first, then my mother joined in, then Uncle Roberto, then my cousins, until the entire backyard was filled with the sound of my family celebrating something they were just beginning to understand. Carmen, my mother said, tears streaming down her face, why didn't you tell us? I looked at her, then at the faces of my family members, seeing them with new eyes. Because it's not about the recognition, I said. It's about the work. It's about getting up every morning and choosing to do something that matters, even when people tell you it's foolish. I turned back to my aunt, who was still standing frozen with her wine glass in her hand. Tia, you said I would die broke and forgotten. But I want you to know that every kid who goes through our program knows my name. Every young person who gets their first government internship because of the program I created carries a piece of my legacy with them. Every time one of them goes on to create their own programs, to help other kids, to make a difference in their communities, they're extending the impact of my work. I paused, looking around at my family. So yes, I might die without a big house or a fancy car. But I will die knowing that I used my life to make other lives better. I will die knowing that I created opportunities for young people who might never have had them otherwise. I will die knowing that I chose purpose over profit, and that choice created ripples that will continue long after I'm gone. The letter in my hand seemed to glow in the afternoon sun, but I realized that the real power wasn't in the presidential recognition. The real power was in the understanding that my work, my choices, my dedication to something bigger than myself had meaning that transcended any measure of conventional success. And Tia, I said, my voice gentle now, I hope someday you'll understand that there are many ways to live a rich life. Money is just one of them. The barbecue continued, but everything had changed. My family members approached me throughout the afternoon, asking questions about my work, about the kids I helped, about the meeting with the president. My cousin Miguel, who worked in IT for a government contractor, pulled me aside to ask if there were opportunities for kids interested in technology. My cousin Sophia, a nurse, wanted to know if we had health programs for the teenagers in our care. Even my Uncle Roberto, who had always been kind but had never shown much interest in my work, cornered me by the grill to ask about the details of the presidential recognition. Carmen, he said, flipping burgers with one hand and gesturing with his beer with the other, I have to admit, I never really understood what you did. I mean, I knew you worked with kids, but I thought it was just like babysitting or something. I laughed, the first genuine laugh I'd had all day. It's okay, Tio. It's hard to explain what community work looks like from the outside. But this program you created, this pipeline thing, you're actually changing these kids' lives? I thought about Jamal Thompson, now working as a youth counselor. About Maria Santos, the intern at the Department of Education. About the Williams boy, who had just received a full scholarship to Howard University. We're giving them opportunities they wouldn't have had otherwise, I said. But they're the ones changing their own lives. I just help create the pathways. Roberto nodded slowly. You know what? I have a construction company. We're always looking for good workers, especially young people who are willing to learn. Maybe some of your kids would be interested in learning trades. Construction, electrical work, plumbing, these are good careers. I felt a spark of excitement. Actually, we've been trying to expand our job training programs. Most of our focus has been on college prep and government internships, but we know that not every kid wants to go to college right away. Some of them would thrive in skilled trades. Let's talk about it, Roberto said. Maybe we can create something together. As the afternoon wore on, I found myself having similar conversations with other family members. My grandmother Rosa, who had been quiet through most of the drama, pulled me aside as I was helping clean up. Mija, she said, her weathered hands taking mine, I want you to know that I have always been proud of you. I felt tears prick my eyes. Abuela, no, let me finish. I came to this country with nothing but hope for my children and grandchildren. I wanted them to have opportunities one never had, but I also wanted them to remember where they came from, to help others the way people helped us. She squeezed my hands. You could have taken your Georgetown education and made a lot of money. You could have moved to a fancy neighborhood and forgotten about people like us. But instead, you chose to help kids who remind you of yourself, who come from families like ours. That makes you wealthy in ways that matter. I hugged my grandmother, feeling the weight of her words. I learned from watching you, Abuela. You always helped anyone who needed it, even when we didn't have much ourselves. Exactly, she said. And now you're doing the same thing, but on a bigger scale. You're helping hundreds of kids, not just the neighbors on our block. As the sun began to set over D.C., painting the sky in shades of pink and gold, I noticed that my Aunt Esperanza had been unusually quiet for the past few hours. She sat at the patio table, her wine glass mostly untouched, staring at something in the distance. I debated whether to approach her. Part of me wanted to let her stew in her embarrassment, to let her face the consequences of her cruel words. But another part of me, the part that had been shaped by years of working with young people who acted out because they were hurt, recognized something in her posture. I sat down across from her. Tia, are you okay? She looked up at me, and I was surprised to see tears in her eyes. Carmen, I owe you an apology. I waited, not sure what to say. I was wrong about you, she continued. I was wrong about your work, wrong about your choices, wrong about everything. But more than that, I was cruel. I said things that were designed to hurt you, and I did it in front of our entire family. I studied her face, seeing something I'd never seen before: vulnerability. Why? I asked softly. Why did you say those things? Esperanza was quiet for a long moment. Because I was jealous, she said finally. I know that sounds ridiculous, but it's true. I was jealous of your sense of purpose, your passion for your work. I've never had that. I frowned. But you have a successful marriage, a beautiful house, financial security. I have all the things that look good from the outside, she interrupted. But Carmen, I wake up every morning and I don't know why I'm here. I don't have a mission, a calling, a reason to get up other than to go shopping or meet friends for lunch. I've never created anything, never built anything, never made a difference in anyone's life. I felt my anger at her dissolving, replaced by something like understanding. Tia, there are many ways to find purpose. I know, she said, but I've been so focused on money, on status, on having the right things and living in the right neighborhood, that I forgot to think about what actually matters. And when I see you, with your old car and your small apartment but your incredible sense of purpose, it makes me feel empty. She wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. I attacked you because I was trying to convince myself that my choices were better than yours. But seeing that letter, hearing about your work, watching our family's reaction, I realized that you're the one who's been living a meaningful life. You're the one who's going to be remembered. I reached across the table and took her hand. Tia, it's not too late for you to find purpose. You have resources, connections, life experience. You could use all of that to make a difference. She squeezed my hand. What would I do? I don't have your education, your skills with young people. You don't need to work with kids, I said. There are so many ways to contribute. You could volunteer with organizations that help families. You could mentor women who are starting businesses. You could use your social connections to raise money for causes you care about. I thought about all the wealthy women I'd met through fundraising events, the ones who had found deep satisfaction in using their privilege to create opportunities for others. The Urban Youth Development Center is always looking for board members, I said. People who can help us navigate the business side of running a nonprofit, who can open doors and make connections. You could be incredibly valuable in that role. Esperanza looked up at me with something like hope in her eyes. You would want me to be involved with your work? After what I said? Family is complicated, I said. We hurt each other sometimes, but we also have the opportunity to do better. If you're serious about wanting to find purpose, then yes, I'd love to have you involved. As the barbecue wound down and family members began to leave, I found myself in a series of conversations about potential collaborations. My cousin Miguel wanted to create technology internships for kids interested in coding. Sophia was interested in developing health and wellness programs. Uncle Roberto was serious about creating pathways into skilled trades. But perhaps most surprising was my Aunt Esperanza, who approached me as I was carrying dishes into the kitchen. Carmen, she said, I want you to know that I'm serious about what we talked about. I want to be involved with your work, but I also want to make amends for what I said today. She handed me a folded piece of paper. This is a check. I want to make a donation to the Urban Youth Development Center. It's not enough to undo my words, but it's a start. I looked at the check and gasped. It was for $10,000. Tia, this is incredibly generous, but... It's not generous, she said firmly. It's necessary. I've been spending money on things that don't matter while you've been struggling to fund programs that change lives. This is the least I can do. I hugged her, feeling the complicated mixture of emotions that comes with forgiveness and new beginnings. The woman who had tried to tear me down with her words was now trying to build me up with her actions. As I drove home that evening, the presidential letter safely tucked in my purse and my aunt's check in my pocket, I reflected on how dramatically the day had changed. I'd arrived at the barbecue feeling defensive about my choices, worried about my family's judgment, uncertain about my future. I was leaving with a renewed sense of purpose, a deeper understanding of my impact, and the beginning of new partnerships that could expand our work in ways I'd never imagined. The cherry blossoms were blooming throughout Washington, D.C., their pink petals falling like confetti on the streets. As I drove through the city where I'd chosen to build my life and my career, I realized that my aunt had been right about one thing: this work was changing me. But she'd been wrong about everything else. I wasn't going to die broke. I was going to die rich in all the ways that mattered. And now, with my family finally understanding the value of my work, with new opportunities for collaboration and growth, the ripples of my impact were about to expand in ways I'd never dared to dream. 3 months later, the Urban Youth Development Center had never looked better. The check from my Aunt Esperanza had been just the beginning. Word about the presidential recognition had spread through Washington's nonprofit community, and suddenly we were receiving donations from sources I'd never imagined. I stood in our newly renovated computer lab, watching as 15 teenagers worked on coding projects under the guidance of my cousin Miguel, who had taken a part-time consulting role with us. The room hummed with the sound of keyboards clicking and excited conversations about algorithms and app development. "Ms. Martinez," called out Destiny Williams, a 17-year-old from Southeast D.C. who had joined our program 6 months earlier. "Look what I created." I walked over to her computer, where she was showing off a website she'd built from scratch. It was a platform designed to connect teenagers with volunteer opportunities in their neighborhoods. "Destiny, this is incredible," I said, genuinely amazed. "How did you come up with this idea?" She grinned. "I was thinking about how you always talk about the ripple effect, you know? How helping one person creates opportunities to help more people. I wanted to create something that would help other kids find ways to make a difference in their communities." I felt that familiar surge of pride and possibility that came with watching young people discover their own capacity for leadership. "Have you thought about presenting this to the City Council? They're always looking for innovative approaches to community engagement." Her eyes widened. "You think they want to hear from me?" "I think they'd be lucky to hear from you," I said. "Let's work on putting together a presentation." The computer lab was just one of several new initiatives we'd launched since the barbecue. My cousin Sophia had helped us develop a health and wellness program that included nutrition education, mental health support, and basic medical care. Uncle Roberto had partnered with us to create a skilled trades apprenticeship program that was already placing young people in well-paying jobs in construction and electrical work. But perhaps the most significant change was the involvement of my Aunt Esperanza. She had thrown herself into nonprofit work with the same intensity she'd once applied to social climbing. She joined our board of directors, where her business acumen and social connections were proving invaluable. More importantly, she discovered a passion for financial literacy education, developing workshops to teach young people about budgeting, saving, and building credit. "Carmen!" Her voice carried across the center's main hall as she approached with a small group of well-dressed women. "I want you to meet the members of the Junior League's Community Investment Committee. They're interested in funding our expansion into Prince George's County." I smiled, still sometimes amazed by the transformation in my aunt. She'd found her purpose, and it had changed everything about her energy and outlook. "Ladies," she said, addressing the group, "this is my niece Carmen Martinez, the founder of our internship program and the recipient of the Presidential Recognition Award for Outstanding Community Service." The women nodded respectfully, and I noticed how naturally Esperanza had learned to speak about the work with genuine pride and understanding. "Carmen," said one of the women, Esperanza has been telling us about your model for connecting underserved youth with government internships. We'd love to hear more about how you developed the program." As I began to explain the program's origins, I caught my aunt's eye. She gave me a small nod of encouragement, and I was struck by how much our relationship had changed. The woman who had once mocked my choices was now one of my strongest advocates. After the meeting, as the junior league members were leaving, Esperanza lingered behind. "Carmen," she said, "I have something to tell you. I've been thinking about what you said at the barbecue, about there being many ways to live a rich life." I waited, curious about where she was going with this. "I've been wealthy in terms of money for years," she continued, "but I've never been wealthy in terms of purpose. Working with the center, seeing the impact of the programs, watching these kids discover their potential, it's made me realize what I was missing." She paused, looking around the bustling center. "I used to think you were wasting your life. Now I realize I was wasting mine." "You weren't wasting it," I said gently. "You were just living it one way. Now you're living it differently. That's generous of you to say, but we both know I was selfish and shallow. The things I said to you at the barbecue, I'm still ashamed of them." I thought about how to respond. The truth was, her words had hurt deeply, but they had also led to a moment of clarity that had changed not just how I saw my work, but how my entire family understood the value of purpose-driven life. "Tia," I said finally, "your words that day were cruel, but they also created an opportunity for all of us to have important conversations about what really matters. If you hadn't pushed me to defend my choices, I might never have shared the presidential letter with the family. And if I hadn't shared it, you might never have discovered your own passion for this work." She smiled, tears in her eyes. "You're saying my cruelty accidentally led to something good? I'm saying that sometimes the most difficult moments in our lives create opportunities for growth and change. Your words hurt, but they also led to this, to you finding your purpose, to our family coming together to support the center, to all of these new programs and opportunities." "The ripple effect," she said softly. "Exactly. The ripple effect." 1 year later, the second annual Martinez Family Barbecue was being held at the Urban Youth Development Center. What had started as a private family gathering had evolved into a community celebration, with current and former program participants, their families, board members, and volunteers all coming together. I stood on the small stage we'd set up in the center's main hall, looking out at a crowd of nearly 200 people. The space was decorated with banners showcasing the achievements of our program participants, college acceptances, job placements, entrepreneurial ventures, and community service projects. "A year ago," I said into the microphone, "I was at a family barbecue where someone told me I was going to die broke and forgotten. Today, I'm looking at a room full of people who prove every day that wealth comes in many forms." The crowd applauded, and I saw my Aunt Esperanza in the front row, beaming with pride. She'd been instrumental in organizing this event, using her social connections to attract sponsors and her business skills to manage the logistics. "This year has been transformative for our center," I continued. "We've expanded our programs, opened new locations, and created partnerships that are changing lives throughout the D.C. metro area. But more importantly, we've proven that when a community comes together around a shared purpose, incredible things can happen." I gestured to the banners around the room. "These aren't just statistics or success stories. These are young people who have discovered their own power to create change. They're the real wealth of our community." As I spoke, I caught sight of several faces in the crowd that represented the ripple effect of our work. There was Jamal Thompson, now completing his master's degree in social work, who had brought 3 of his current men's to the event. There was Maria Santos, who had parlayed her Department of Education internship into a full-time position and was now developing policy around college access for underserved communities. There was Destiny Williams, who had not only presented her volunteer platform to the city council but had received funding to expand it citywide. She was now a freshman at Georgetown, my alma mater, majoring in computer science and public policy. "But perhaps the most important lesson I've learned this year," I said, looking directly at my aunt, "is that it's never too late to discover your purpose. It's never too late to choose meaning over materialism, impact over income, service over self-interest." The crowd applauded again, and I saw my aunt wipe tears from her eyes. My family taught me that lesson in the most unexpected way. Sometimes the people who challenge us the most are the ones who help us grow the most. Sometimes the moments that hurt us the most are the ones that reveal our greatest strengths. I paused, thinking about the journey that had brought us all to this moment. So to anyone who has ever been told that their dreams are too small, their salaries too low, their impact too limited, I want you to know that you are richer than you realize. You are wealthy in ways that matter. And your work, your dedication, your choice to serve others, that creates ripples that will extend far beyond what you can see. As I concluded my remarks, the crowd rose to their feet in applause. But what moved me most was seeing my Aunt Esperanza stand up and begin to clap, her face radiant with the kind of joy that comes from finally understanding what it means to live a meaningful life. After the formal program ended, the party continued with music, dancing, and food. I found myself moving through the crowd, reconnecting with program participants, thanking donors and volunteers, and marveling at how much had changed in just 1 year. "Carmen!" called out a familiar voice. I turned to see Marcus Williams, our executive director, approaching with a huge smile on his face. "I have some news to share. Good news, I hope." "The best news," he said. "The Department of Education has approved our proposal to replicate the Urban Youth Development Center model in 10 cities across the country. They're providing federal funding for a 5-year pilot program." I felt my knees go weak. "Are you serious?" "I'm serious. Carmen, your little internship program is about to go national. You're going to be training staff in cities from Los Angeles to Miami, from Detroit to Phoenix. The ripple effect of your work is about to become a wave." I looked around the room at all the faces, young people who had discovered their potential, family members who had found new purpose, community leaders who had invested in our mission. The presidential letter that had seemed like the pinnacle of recognition now felt like just the beginning. "There's more," Marcus continued. "They want you to lead the national expansion. It would mean traveling, training, consulting with other organizations. Carmen, you'd be moving from serving hundreds of kids to potentially impacting thousands." I felt overwhelmed by the magnitude of the opportunity. I don't know what to say." "Say yes," said my Aunt Esperanza, who had appeared at my elbow. "Carmen, this is your chance to create the kind of impact you've always dreamed of." I looked at her, this woman who had once been my harshest critic and was now one of my strongest supporters. "But what about the center here? What about our programs?" "The center will continue," Marcus said. "We have an incredible team, amazing board members, and a community that's invested in our success. But Carmen, this is bigger than just D.C. This is about taking everything you've learned and sharing it with the country." I thought about the presidential letter, about the recognition that had seemed so surreal when I first received it. I thought about all the young people I'd worked with over the years, about the ripple effect of their successes, about the possibility of creating similar opportunities for kids across the country. "You know what?" I said, feeling a surge of excitement and purpose. "I think I'm ready for the next challenge." As the celebration continued around us, I found myself thinking about the journey that had brought me to this moment. It had started with a choice to work for meaning rather than money, to serve others rather than serve myself. It had been validated by a letter from the president, but more importantly, it had been validated by the young people whose lives had been changed by the opportunities we created. I thought about my aunt's words from that day at the barbecue, "You're going to die broke." Maybe she was right. Maybe I would never have the financial wealth that she'd once thought was so important. But as I looked around the room at the faces of young people who had discovered their potential, at family members who had found new purpose, at a community that had come together around a shared mission, I realized that I was already rich beyond measure. I was rich in relationships that mattered. I was rich in work that had meaning. I was rich in the knowledge that my life was creating ripples that would extend far beyond what I could see. And now, with the opportunity to take that work national, I was about to become even richer in the ways that truly counted. 5 years later, I stood in the Oval Office for the second time in my life, but this time I wasn't alone. Beside me stood 12 young people from across the country, all graduates of urban youth development centers that had been established through our national expansion program. "Ms. Martinez," said the president, "when I first met you 5 years ago, I had no idea that recognizing your work would lead to this kind of national impact. The Urban Youth Development Center model has now been implemented in 50 cities across the country, serving over 10,000 young people annually. I looked at the young people standing beside me. Kids from Los Angeles and Detroit, from Phoenix and Miami, from small towns and big cities, all united by the opportunities they'd found through programs that had grown from a small initiative in Washington, D.C. But more importantly, the president continued, these young people represent the future of American leadership. They're proof that when we invest in potential, when we create pathways for young people from all backgrounds to serve their communities and their country, we strengthen our democracy. One of the young people, a 19-year-old named Carlos from Phoenix, stepped forward. Mr. President, I want you to know that 5 years ago, I was headed for trouble. I was failing school, running with the wrong crowd, and I had no hope for my future. The Urban Youth Development Center didn't just give me an internship, it gave me a vision of what I could become. He paused, his voice growing stronger. Now I'm a sophomore at Arizona State University, majoring in public policy, and I'm working on legislation to expand educational opportunities for undocumented students. That's the ripple effect Ms. Martinez always talks about, how helping one person creates opportunities to help many more. As I listened to Carlos speak, I thought about the phone call I'd received from my Aunt Esperanza that morning. She was calling from the newest Urban Youth Development Center, which had just opened in Richmond, Virginia, where she'd relocated to help establish the program. Carmen, she'd said, her voice filled with excitement, you should see these kids. They remind me so much of the teenagers at our original center. They have that same mixture of potential and hunger for opportunities. We're going to change lives here. The woman who had once told me I was going to die broke had become one of the most effective advocates for youth development in the country. She'd found her purpose, and it had transformed not just her life, but the lives of hundreds of young people across Virginia. After the White House ceremony, I found myself walking through the streets of D.C. past the original Urban Youth Development Center that had started it all. The building had been expanded and renovated, but it still sat on the same corner of 14th and U Street, still serving kids from the same neighborhoods where I'd started my work over a decade earlier. I thought about the barbecue where my aunt had delivered her cruel prediction. I thought about the letter that had changed everything. I thought about the journey that had taken me from a small nonprofit office to the Oval Office, from serving dozens of kids to impacting thousands. But mostly, I thought about the young people, the ones who had trusted me with their dreams, who had worked hard to overcome obstacles, who had gone on to create their own ripples of positive change. I thought about wealth, about richness, about what it really means to live a successful life. My aunt had been wrong about one thing. I wasn't going to die broke. I was going to die rich in all the ways that mattered. Rich in relationships that had meaning. Rich in work that had impact. Rich in the knowledge that my life had created opportunities for others to discover their own potential. And perhaps most importantly, I was going to die knowing that the ripples I'd created would continue long after I was gone, as the young people I'd worked with went on to create their own programs, mentor their own kids, and build their own legacies of service. That, I realized, was the greatest wealth of all. If you liked this story, leave your opinion in the comments and, of course, leave a like and subscribe. Turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any videos. Big hug and see you soon.